every major seam. So like on the arm seams, on the cuffs, around each pocket. That's all just simple. And doing it on this whole garment probably took maybe 15 minutes total.
It really highlights it. It looks pretty, yeah,
Right,
it makes a big difference.
It gives it like this aged, nasty, and you see how easy it is to do. Another easy, cheap, and quick way to add some color in this dress is spray paint. And a lot of times, like, I'll just pretty much outline the garment with the paint. And in cases like this, a sewing man can really use your best friend. It makes it so much easier to do. If you don't have one, have a friend wear the garment and have them wear crappy clothes underneath so in case you spray paint them, you're not ruining something nice. And spray paint works well on those awful stop start fabrics I mentioned earlier. Spray paint goes through stop start. And then they also actually make fabric-specific spray paint. Usually, and two with these, I find they're almost like a one-shot deal. 96 can of Walmart spray paint is better. And white, as I mentioned earlier, works really well on darker fabric. As well as, when things are stained, it's not always uniform, so we can have like some lighter areas. And if you just lightly mist it, it doesn't blatantly look like the fabric is white. It just gives it like a faded out. And I apologize to the front row, it's probably getting really hot right now. If you start seeing dancing unicorns, that's and if you have like, a lot of rips and tears, take advantage of the lining that's exposed in there. Make something really like aged in there, make it nasty and gross inside. So that way as the actors move, like the fabric gets exposed, it doesn't look like, oops, I forgot a spot. Now a trick I like using to add detail is liquid latex. And this is just Streamlined Wash Latex. I just use a Q-tip, and have those people in here work with latex like as a makeup tool or anything like that. It's pretty much a similar idea with the costuming. You can do nice build-ups and like nasty texture. And so we're just gonna pile some on. And like with the zombies, you can make it look like, like you have gobs of blood and like goo and flesh and like rotting intestines or something. You could call it mold, you could call it slime. Like I was covered an entire dress, like down the front with latex and made it look like vomit. I did like a sort of Exorcist-inspired vomiting character. And the thicker you put the latex on, the more texture it'll have. And you can do tons of layers of this. You can do, like only one or two. It's up to you and how much texture you want. I kind of like to pile it on thick so it's very obvious that there's a texture and it stands out. And again, you want stuff to be like random and asymmetrical. You don't want, perfectly straight lines or it looking like a circle or a pattern. And with latex, you can use a hairdryer to make it dry faster. If you want to poke it, feel free.
I have a question. Is not working in a time frame, would it be better to put it on thinner and do a second coat on it, or is it just okay?
It's up to your preference, honestly. Like, if I had, 3.5 hours to this, I would do a bunch of layers. Being that I have an hour and a half, for me it was just easier to put it on thick and just deep cook it with the hairdryer.
Will it peel eventually out, or?
If you pick at it, I've been able to wash costuming with latex numerous times and never had it peel off. The worst I've had happen is sometimes if you wash it, the paint on top of it will start flaking over the years. But that's just easy as that to take a gelatin. But yeah, the hard next door. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you ever used any kind of like polyacrylic coating to keep everything on there?
Yeah, I have used that. It does give the crispy effect to the fabric, and it will eventually, from washing, even that will start to come off. Gelatin. All you do is you mix some of that up with some hot water, and it makes a nice like coagulated, like gooey texture. And you can put that on costuming and then cover it in latex, and it'll seal it into the costume. And that's another trick that'll work. However, that one is not as washable. After a couple washes, the latex on the gelatin will start to dissolve into the gelatin, and it kind of deflates itself and starts looking like a sad balloon. So we did some like moldy, mossy colors on the one shoulder. So I guess for this one, there'll be some sort of like flesh wound, acid residue, like, you know, zombie got hit in the head with a shovel and he's kind of oozing blood out. Or maybe one of his victims was bleeding all over the place and it splattered on him. And I like to use a couple different colors of red for blood, just because it gives it more depth. I do not like at all like the fire engine red for blood. It looks too fake. It looks too much like something out of a bad B movie. I like the darker shade. It looks more natural. It looks more like after something's bled and starts to dry, you start getting like the brownish tinges to it. So for this, I'll just use literally an awful, crappy, beat-up old paintbrush. And you don't have to use fancy paintbrushes for this at all. You know, they can be old, battered ones you've had for a while, or just like the inexpensive ones you buy at the craft store. You can get usually like a bin of like 25 of them that, you know, they use for like kids with watercolors, you know. Now we're just going to start randomly. And you don't need to perfectly paint the latex, you know. You can just kind of splatter the color on there.
What shade of red is that?
This specific one I'm using right now is called Redbird. And the second color I'm going to add some on top is called Deep Red. And like, I'm not even using the paintbrush properly. I'm not using the ends of the bristles. I'm using the side of it. My art school teacher would be so proud.
Look at the focus, the determination.
Alright, so we got the darker red on there. It's not a problem at all. So I just kind of half wash my brush out. And just put the slightly less dark, deep red on top of it. And not all over the whole thing. You know, I want the contrast of the different colors. So we're going to let that set up and dry for a minute right there. And a trick too is, since these are like acrylic is a water-based type of paint. If you have a spot where you're like, ooh, I don't like that, that's too thick or too gobby, bottle of water, you can just literally flood out the color and look, the color's no longer there. So like, let's say I didn't like these gobs, they look too pink to me. Now they're back to white and I can repaint them fresh. And the same would go for like the other areas that I use the acrylic paint on too. If you're like, oh, this is kind of a random spot, I don't like it. If you just keep flooding it out with water, it'll fade out the paint while it's still wet. Now once it is fully dried, it will not do that anymore. So you kind of have like a 20-minute time window to be like, do I like this or do I not? What do I think? And you can always add paint on top of paint if you don't like it. That's the nice thing about the acrylic is, let's say this layer dries and you're like, you know, I didn't want this to be red. I decided I'd rather have this be like brown. You can just paint right over top of it with brown if you change your mind. The colors aren't going to intermingle once they're dried. You know, as I said, I just took the brush and kind of ramble with it on there. And so an easy way to cover that up is we'll just take the steam sponge that I was using earlier, mix with a little bit of water and wax, dribble it on there, and there's some green in the sponge that's going to dribble through too. But just by doing that simple dribble, it's filled in like all of the outline seaming, but left the latex and the color on the latex intact. Okay, make sure that the paint on the latex is dry before you pour the watered down paint on it, otherwise also you have a waterfall of color going down your garment. And then you got the same too, stipple sponge is your best friend. And you can just add like random areas of stipple to emphasize for like nasty blood stained area. Now another cool easy trick you can do with latex is I like to do like cutaway areas on fabric, rather than like, you know, as I mentioned about the issue, sometimes you rip too many holes, something you have like stripper garments by accident, is I'll do lining, just flesh colored lining. I'll rip open a big hole, like let's say I'll do down the side of a dress or a suit coat or a shirt, and I'll put flesh colored lining, and you can get this at fabric stores. It's usually in like the dance, gymnastics, ice skating section. You'll have like these hideous like sparkly ice blue, like leotard fabric, and then you'll have like 4 different shades of flesh tones. And it's really stretchy, and it's usually really cheap, like $1 or so a yard. And I'll just glue it underneath a hole I made in the fabric. So that way it simulates that you have skin showing through without actually having the skin showing through. And that way, one, it's not as cold for the actor. It's good for modesty and any comfort issues and like showing things you don't want to show. And you can do a lot of fun things with that. Like on here, I put some, you can mix a lot of things with latex for texture. I just put some cotton, put some latex on top of it to kind of simulate ribs, kind of like a corpse bride-ish idea, if anyone remembers that shit, the wedding dress with the ribs. So yeah, that's just some latex and some cotton. And those are only about half painted. And someone had mentioned about like the speckled crackle paint, the spray paint. As you see, sometimes with the texture paint, it'll flake a little too much, and give you a little too much texture, but it can do some cool tricks. Two types of hot glue guns. You'll usually have like the cute little colored ones, and these are like the low temperature hot glue guns, which are good if you accidentally burn your fingers often. Like I actually no longer have tactile sensation in these two fingers. So these are low temperature, so if you get it on your skin, it doesn't really hurt. It's just like a little like uncomfortable feeling, but it's not an actual burn. So this is good if like, you know, you're working with a lot of your crew, or if you're worried about burning yourself, the low temperature ones come in handy. The only con to low temperature glue guns is the glue isn't as hot, therefore you have less workable time with it. So the high temperature hot glue guns, which are typically black, you get about 1 minute to 2 minutes of time frame before the glue gets too thick and coagulated to work with. These usually only about 30 seconds to a minute before it starts getting too tacky to actually work with. This came from the lovely vintage section at Goodwill. It looks like something Marsha Brady would have attempted to have worn to prom originally. And it's this nasty, like 1972 coral color, I guess is the best way to describe it. And so what I did on here is I just took the sea sponge, and this is just brown, I just dabbed it on, just random brown water. And an easy trick is literally to just fill the sponge up with the water you paint, start at the top of a garment, and just let it flood down. And it'll just give you natural runs. It looks like something is smoothed out and has stained it. As you see, it pretty much requires no effort. It requires me to do this and just squeeze. And then I just let it dry for about 1 minute or so. And that's an easy trick to do, especially on like longer gowns. You kind of start at the top and just let the paint pour all the way down to the dress. And you can do it as heavy as you want or as lightly. You can have just a few select areas. You can do like small dribbles, or you can make it look like Niagara Falls ran down the dress. And I started pattering up the top and the bottom a little bit. The top was a very sheer chiffon organza, so literally this is just rippable with my hand. There's no effort in order to have to rip that. The bottom's a little thicker, so I started using the carpet. And then another tool that comes in handy is this is a wire brush. They sell these at craft stores, but where I like to get them from is the barbecue grilling section at like Walmart or the grocery store. You know, in the summer they bring out all the random cooking stuff. And by like, you know, August, start of fall, they mark all these down to like $1. And these are intended to be used to like scrub your grill and everything. But they have really hard, nasty bristles, and they catch fabric and give you like little like runs, little like tears. If you have a really delicate fabric, like a silk or a chiffon, it just naps the fabric up. Like if you've ever had like a nice dress and caught it on something, you get like that weird texture going on it. This will do that for you. And if you work this around areas where you already have tears, it makes the cuts look more raggy, start getting little holes around the tears. And again, it just adds another level of texture. And this works best on the more delicate fabric, something like a suit coat usually doesn't distress as well with the brush. Dresses tend to work best. Men's dress shirts work really well because they're a finer, like cotton fabric. Exactly, that's the thing. This is meant to be nasty. If you're like, oh, that tear is too big, it's a zombie. It's a haunt costume. If it looks pretty, you have a problem, you know, like, so, you know, you want to catch the fabric and just abuse it, you know. If you don't like the actor, if it's one of those actors that wanders out of his room all the time, I would use this on the actor. It starts fraying the fabric, you get those natural frays, so it just makes it look more realistic, more worn out.